Hello, welcome to another episode of CanIPatent.com. Today I'm doing this interview along with my law partner, Eric Bjorgum. Eric's been a litigator for how many years? About 30 years, Eric? Or
25, 26. Yeah.
yeah, so we've been I've been in their law firm for over 10 years. It's been my happiest 10 years in any law firm. So and then we our guest today is David Judson. He's the fifth generation member of the Judson family who's running the studio Judson Studios, which is the largest stained glass and artisanal glass studio in the country, I believe. Or is that just west of the Rockies,
Yeah,
David?
probably west of the Rockies. Yeah, there's depending on which, how you carve it up, but yeah, we're one of the largest. I'd say that.
Great, great. Well, I'd like Craig to pull up a picture, Judson family. Here's the pictures, and the oldest picture is David's great great grandfather, and I believe did he or part of the Judson family fought. I was reading in Wikipedia in the Civil War, so that's pretty cool on the Union side. And then
Yes.
to the far right, that's David's father. He was the last Judson before David to be running the studio. So five generations and going strong. So excellent.
Interesting.
You can definitely see the family resemblance. Um,
Is that
so
right? Yeah, I guess
I
so.
think so. And you can check out the company's website at www.judsonstudios.com to see images of and videos of some recent projects and artwork they're working on. Again, Judson Studios has spanned over 125 years of work around the U.S. and the whole entire world, in fact. And you can see their work all over the place. One interesting fact about Judson Studios is that an original art school was founded by the second generation Judson, became the USC School of Fine Art. So that was pretty cool. And they've got a long and storied history in Southern California. Dave, can you give a brief summary of how Judson Studios was founded and how it's grown and gotten to where it is today?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. The Judson Studios started in 1897, like you said, about 125 years ago, by William Lees Judson, and he came out. He was a came out to California in 1893, basically from instructions of his doctor to find a warm place to die. And he didn't die until 1928. So I think that's what California does to us. But he started the School of Fine Arts for USC. He was the first dean of the school. He started a organization called the Aurora Guild of Fellow Crafters, which was kind of a group of artisans that got together to sell their wares and kind of work together. And then he also, with his son, started Judson Studios in 1897. And so it was originally called the Colonial Art Glass Company. His sons were really the operators, but we attribute it to William Lees because he got him out here. He found them jobs initially. They started their own company, and then he did the initial designs for them, as he was an early plein air painter. So he's one of the earliest plein air painters out in Southern California, painting the landscapes throughout the Southwest and kind of different areas. So um, yeah, so he was really the one who kind of initiated all of that. And my great grandfather Walter was kind of the next generation. Worked with two of his brothers. One of his brothers ended up being more of the shop kind of person. The other one, Paul, left to become a contractor. And then my grandfather took over. My great grandfather died fairly young. He was a young man when he died, and so my grandfather, who was a lawyer, he'd actually gone to USC, became a lawyer, and was practicing law when his father died, and so he ended up stepping in and taking over since he was the only son. And so he ran the company from probably the late 20s to the early 60s when my father took
Oh,
over in the 60s. And my father was the youngest of three children. and but kind of took over the company and ran it until about 2003 when he passed away suddenly. And so I had been there working from 1996, kind of off and on. And so when he passed, I was kind of the only one left. My brother had been there for 10 years, but he'd left to become an architect.
Okay.
And so the company's kind of grown and shrunk over the years. You know, obviously, when you're that old, economic factors take their toll, right? With the Depression, World War One, the Depression, World War Two, and then the post-war boom. So after World War II was probably the largest the company got at that time. There may have been, 30 or 40 employees. It's kind of shrunk down a little bit. And then since I've been there, it's grown pretty steadily, and we're about 30 employees right now, operating a couple of at a couple of different facilities. We've actually expanded from one facility to three, and doing different kinds of glass and art glass and that kind of thing. So that's part of the expansion that I've been working on since I've been there.
Right. Do we have another generation of Judsons waiting in the wings?
Yeah, well, my son, I have a son and a daughter. They're both, somewhat interested. So my son's still in school, so at the university. So we'll see. He seems interested, and yeah, I'm actually gonna perhaps get him involved here pretty shortly and try him out, see what he
Oh,
thinks.
good. Well, don't die young or anything. So,
Yeah,
he needs to be trained up before he can
that's
take
right.
over the helm.
Before I can check out.
Yeah, excellent. So great. Well, thanks for that summary. I'd like to start this questioning a little more with some technological innovations that you've done. I've seen a lot of the older traditional Judson stained glass all over the place in SoCal at
Inglewood Cemetery.
Inglewood, yeah, Inglewood Cemetery.
Yeah.
You've done some beautiful stuff there,
Yeah.
more recent stuff, and there's older, generations past, more traditional stained glass. The new stuff is kind of the fused glass, which I love personally. Can you tell me some of the technological innovations you've had to make in order to kind of come up with these new ideas?
Yeah. So the fusing is a fairly new technology at least in the world of stained glass. Stained glass, obviously, we used to say that the latest invention in stained glass was 500 years ago with the glass cutter, right? And so it's an old craft, goes back 1,000 years, and is a very much of a handcrafted trade and art form. And really, that's the difference between a good window and a bad window is just the people that are making it, right? And the technology is not really a factor. It's more about craftsmanship and tricks of the trade, in essence, right? Like just very subtle things that really make a difference in terms of technique that can differentiate a good window from a bad window. And so it really depends on the crew that you have, and we have a very good crew. So I'd say in our traditional stuff, we're one of the best. And then in terms of technology, it was about 8 years ago. We were in a competition for a large commission in the Kansas City area in Leawood, Kansas, and we were a finalist with a German firm, and the German firm was very much a modern. After World War II, the Germans went very modern, and ironically, the United States became very traditional in kind of design directions. And most American artists were going to Germany to get their windows done, and so I had this opportunity to compete with a German firm, and so we knew that there was a split between the committee of traditionalists and contemporary minded folks. And so I knew that us coming from the traditional side, if we really pushed ourselves to design something kind of contemporary, but with some traditional aspects of it, that we could win the contract, and we won it. And this was the largest project that we had ever undertaken. It was basically about 94 feet by 36 feet. And the window is approximately the size of a basketball court, if you can imagine. And so we designed this window.
You mean this picture here?
Yeah, that's it. come up.
Yeah, that's the Church of the Resurrection,
Church of the
and yeah,
Resurrection. Yeah, and we would.
it's the I read that it's the largest stained glass work in the world.
Well, it's the largest fused glass window in the world. So
Okay,
there
sorry.
are largest windows, but this is kind of the largest window. And I would say that's like in one plane, right? That's like one wall. Other large windows have multiple walls or different angles. This is the one that's on a single plane. So it's almost like a huge, massive mural.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
this is in the main chapel, right? Or
sanctuary. Yeah.
sanctuary. Yeah,
So
this is
they were kind of in an auditorium and they surveyed their congregation about what would make the space feel sacred, and
mhm.
it's an overwhelmingly response that it would be stained glass. So the architect designed this massive window, and like I said, there's a resurrected Christ that's right in the middle of it, Church of the Resurrection, and so we won the competition, but we had designed something we had absolutely no idea how we were going to make, and so we ended up reaching out to an artist named Narcissa Quagliata, who was one of the few stained glass artists that actually operated. Can you double click on that image? You can see a little. And so anyway, Narcissus Quagliata was one of the few major stained glass artists working in fused glass. And so my creative director at the time went and took a class with him up in Denver, convinced him to come work with us. And so we hired him to help us through this project. And it was about a 3-year, almost 4-year project to complete. And so really the idea with working with Narcissus was to bring the technique of fusing to a major studio, because no major studio had ever worked in this technique. And so fusing started was scientifically possible or capable in the late 1980s, and that was designed by a firm out of Portland called Bullseye Glass.
Oh,
And
right, up where I am.
yeah, exactly. And they figured out how to make all of their colors compatible, meaning you could take the different colors, combine them, put them in a kiln, and fuse them to create multiple colors in one piece of glass. Where before that, anytime you tried to fuse glass, traditional stained glass, it would stress because it had different coefficients of expansion. So they would stress each other out and crack over time. So Bullseye came up with this technology to allow the fusibility of all their colors. And so we really committed to this as a studio and in a studio environment. And like I said, no studio in the world, actually, large studio, has committed to fusing at the scale that we have. So I realized, or I questioned myself about, this is either a really good idea or a really bad idea. There's obviously someone hasn't done this for a reason. And so I can see why now. It has not been for the faint of heart, but we've been at it now. We expanded to a second facility to bring in all the kilns that are needed, the electric kilns.
Right. And this is your fused glass studio, correct?
Yeah, on the right-hand side there, the far right, if you can, I don't know if somebody can click on that. So anyway, that technology is very different. It's been a very different process. And my goal with that was to draw in outside artists, so like who are not working in glass. So a lot of painters working through collaborations and that kind of thing. And also what we found is that it's a very painterly thing. So we can actually paint with the glass. So the technology is sheet glass. So if you think about traditional stained glass, it comes in a sheet, you cut it up. Generally, like if there was a face on it, you would paint it with a dark colored paint, fire it, and then lead it together. That's kind of the traditional. With fused glass, we can use sheet glass. Bullseye also makes what's called frit, and they use 4 different sizes of frit that we can spread. So that's like from powder to small gravel. What we most commonly use is like sand. So if you can imagine spreading sand onto a surface with different colors, we can create gradations and transitions of color and fuse that together to get different effects. So it's very painterly and just a very different approach from just using a sheet of glass. And so that technology has been something that, in essence, we learn every day. We learn something new. And so this is really kind of where we're seeing also the computer and software that really has allowed us to do a lot of things that were never done before. It could never be done before. And we brought in a water jet, so we can cut the glass on a water jet.
Mhm.
Again, meaning we can cut any shape just about that it was theoretically not possible by hand. And so a lot of these things that we've introduced to the process are very kind of unique and different to anything that we'd seen 20, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Do you have to
Right.
pay for that technology from the company? Is it licensed somehow, or is it something they
No,
just taught you how to use it, or what?
yeah, I mean, we initially went with Bullseye. There's actually when we started, there was three firms making fusible glass. Now it's just Bullseye. Well, one other firm that moved their production to Mexico, but we committed to using Bullseye for technical support, basically. And so when we first started, yeah, we had never really fused a piece of glass, and so here we are making a basketball-sized window with having
Yeah.
done a technology that we'd used before. Um, but
But-
really, it's up to us now. So it's kind of like, ordering paint. It's like, and the artist works with the paint and their paintbrush. So everything that we design and develop is something that we do. It's not something that we were taught necessarily, other than like what we learned from Narcissus and maybe a few others. But it's really been our own kind of necessity where we've generated our own techniques through that process. So really, they own the material, the process of making the material. I know that the owner told me that he never wanted to patent it. So he's never patented it because he's never wanted to share it, right? So
So he's protecting with trade secrets then, just the techniques for having the glass that has the uh, uniform heat.
compatibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they have a
Okay.
chemist on staff, and so what they're good about too is that generally they're pretty consistent on their colors and their compatibility. So some of the glasses perform better than others, but overall, it's everything that we've developed is on our own.
Yeah, great. And this is an image. I don't know if you could see it of Narcissus. All right. Very good. Eric, why don't you ask some questions for a bit?
Well, yeah, it's been interesting. Already gone into areas that I wasn't thinking about. So Narcissus, did he have techniques that he tried to protect, or did he share that information with you
No,
gladly?
Narcissus, and part of the reason we hired him was for his techniques, right? And he brought them in. And actually, I feel like he's learned a lot of techniques. I mean, the thing about fusing, it's like practicing something, right? You learn something new all the time. But yeah, I mean, in theory, even for the Church of the Resurrection project, I think he was inventing processes and techniques that he hadn't usually used before. Which is the great, interesting thing about working in a studio like that is like your need for expressing something gets developed based on what and so there's no way we could have done that without Narcissus, but at the same time he was kind of learning as he went as well, and so that kind of development was something that was somewhat unexpected, but his knowledge kind of helped give us a starting point, but like I said, it evolves and changes with time.
So do you guys try to protect that stuff like the person in Portland did? Do you try and protect your techniques, or
There are
do you have
things
any?
like, yeah, like, so for example, interestingly now Narcissus teaches fusing and online has, hundreds, thousands of followers, I think, that follow him. And he gives courses on a regular basis, as well as my former creative director, who also now is teaching. And I really had to think about this a lot because I was afraid of disseminating the information or too much information. Um, but in my study and looking at similar techniques or technologies that have been done in the glass world in the past, why hadn't anything really? Yeah, I think the closest one I found was a technique called Jameau out of France, that Picasso and another a handful of very famous artists ended up adopting. And I said, well, why did this die? Like, why isn't it, this seems like it was a big deal, but what happened to it? And I think it was because it was one firm that could do it, and that's it. And so unless you were in Paris or went to them, you couldn't get this technique done. And so I felt like, well, that probably killed it. And so the thought process that I had is like, well, yeah, there are techniques that make a lot of difference. And I realized what the learning curve was very steep on this. And it's something that you never stop learning. You're learning something new every day. So if you're not practicing it on a regular basis, you can't get to a particular level, right? And so I figured, look, it's probably better for this dissemination to be out there, and be the authority on it rather than try to protect it and like end up trying to chase everyone down, because it's like painting. I mean, you can't say, well, you can't
Right.
paint. Yeah.
Right.
And really the devil's in the details. And so my feeling is like, hey, if you want to go for this, go for it. It's not for the faint of heart. It's something that, like, trying to learn a language.
Yeah.
If you attempt at it, you may learn a few words, but to really become fluent, you gotta go in all in and continue to practice on a regular basis. So I didn't fear it in that regard, and I felt like if no one else is doing it, then no one else is going to be interested in it. And so why not be the authority and do it, be the
Right.
best what it is.
Well, that's interesting because in what we do, a lot of times people will come in and they'll talk about whether they should patent something or how they should protect it. And sometimes they don't want to hear this, but I think the best answer is that be the first to the market. Like you're saying, you establish your space in the market and the goodwill that comes with that, right? And that sort of, I think people don't want to hear that sometimes because I think people want sort of a shortcut. Well, I'm going to sit home and collect royalties, but as you said, you're going to spend a lot of your money chasing people, and really there's a lot of work to be done, right? More than just the idea, but the implementation of it. So you do that work first, and then you have your trademark and your brand and all that, and that becomes more important. But a lot of times people are surprised that there might not be a way to protect something like what you're talking about, right? So you have a pretty sophisticated view of it, actually, compared to some people who aren't lawyers. People go, wait, they stole my idea. And it's like, well, you should really
Yeah.
develop your idea,
Yeah, Dave, your idea
Yeah.
is more like you'd rather have a small slice of a giant pie than a whole pie that is a mini pie.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that pie makes it go, like you said, it may go away. It's actually a lot of societies and cultures that have kind of tried to hold on to technology. Like apparently the Aztec civilization had a lot of technology, but they kept it secret, and so they never disseminated technology. So unless you disseminate technology, it doesn't develop and it doesn't have an impact. Whereas the Industrial Revolution was disseminated and it was copied and modified and advanced. So there's a lot to say about not protecting every single thing, but just to get it out there and then let people fight over and continue to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, definitely litigation. I see people all the time who get into bad positions with attorney's fees and opposing parties and all kinds of stuff. And they probably shouldn't have litigated in the first place. It's a pretty big decision to go after someone. So that's interesting. What about, I suppose I was thinking when you were talking about artists, like, I guess people don't sign stained glass, right? Like you don't have one person who takes credit for it, or how does that work? I mean, are there master stained glass people who insist that it be associated with them, or?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good question. It's difficult. I mean, we generally sign Windows Judson Studios, right? Because there's probably a dozen people working on a particular window, right?
Where does it get signed? Like on the glass itself, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah, we sign on the window, generally the bottom right hand corner of a window.
Little copyright notice and everything in there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's usually a date. Yeah, we don't always put the little C on there, but yeah, it's we guess we should.
You should. Yes, you should.
Yeah, I mean, if you go like, for example, people familiar with Tiffany Studios,
Mm.
you'll see a Tiffany Studio signature, and it was signed Tiffany Studios. Rarely signed, in Louis Comfort Tiffany's name. Um, and yeah, but that's something that we talk about. I try to get my designers, to kind of, they usually have their hand, obviously. So the designer, if we're designing it ourselves, that's different. If we're collaborating with an artist, we won't sign it, and we ask the artist if they want it signed. And some of them want it signed with their name, some of them want to sign both our names, some of them no signature at all. And so it kind of depends on the scenario. But yeah, the curse of my forefathers is that they didn't sign all their windows, and so
Really?
yeah, you go out and
Well,
you look and you can't tell, for sure. You can't authenticate it.
well, it's interesting because of all the public art stuff I've done. People are surprised that there's what they call moral rights of public art, which is sort of the right of the artist to be recognized as the artist and the
Mhm.
right of the work to maintain its integrity, which is kind of the U.S. watered down version of something in Europe that has about six prongs to it. But um, have you ever heard of anything? I'd be interested. Have you ever heard of? We've had a few cases in the U.S. where murals or public art is destroyed. Have there been any cases where stained glass is destroyed and anyone's tried to assert any rights over that? Or
Yeah,
I've never heard of that.
actually, very recently, actually, and I don't know, it may have happened today or last week, of the Tropicana Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
My father made the largest barrel dome in stained glass at the time, there in the 70s, and it was there until uh, last a couple weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what happened to it. We were contacted initially. The owners, there was kind of an outcry with local museums and artisans and citizens that the dome needed to be saved. And the owner, I think, had some response to it, but kind of never reached out to us. We were reached out to by other folks, and because they were demolishing the building for the new A's stadium. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know what happened to it. Last I heard, there was a moving company that was potentially going to go in and remove everything.
Hmm.
Um, and if that's the case, it's probably piled up somewhere and going to be not going to be very easy to reproduce anywhere. But so that being said, I think it's interesting because you think about public art, these situations, oftentimes stained glass is location specific,
Hmm.
and if it gets moved, it's maybe not the same thing or whatever. But it's not something that we've ever had to like try to claim rights over,
Mhm.
Right.
as a work of art. Yeah, I would kind of feel like we own the design, but we don't necessarily own the material once it's
Right.
sold to the client.
Yeah. No, I hadn't heard of it either. I'm not judging the situation one way or the other. I was just curious if anyone's even tried to assert that. So it's interesting. Hmm.
Dave, I ask every guest questions about AI because it just is permeating everything now. Um, is AI impacting your business at all yet? And if not, do you think it will? And how will it? And how will you adapt? Is it? I know a lot of artists are using AI to kind of help them create art and come up with ideas and automate a lot of things they used to do by hand. Are you using AI, or is it still just done purely by the artist's hand, maybe on a digital screen or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually are now delving into the AI realm. Recently hired a recent graduate out of SciArc, which is a local architectural school here in LA, and so we've been playing around with it. And basically, what we found so far is that AI is horrible at stained glass.
Hmm. Well,
So
that's good.
yeah,
Does
exactly.
it does it draw
I hope it's horrible at trial work too. So that's what I'm hoping.
does it draw all the saints with six fingers and disconnected body parts?
Yeah, it's horrible at hands and and anatomy. It's horrible. So what we've found is that what it is pretty good at is when we have a design that we put in and then we want to alter it somehow. So we want different colors, we want something to shift, something like that. We're kind of wading into it slowly
Hmm.
and deciding where it's useful and where it's not. What we have found is like so far, kind of initially, there's a little bit of a backlash from clients, that don't necessarily want to know about AI. They don't want to think that we're using AI, and so we've realized, okay, well, we need to kind of pull back a little bit and not, necessarily push that out. So we've decided to market it in a very kind of limited way. Um, and then the second thing, which is kind of interesting to think about, is like computers are dumb, right? It's like what you put in is what you get out, right? Junk in, junk out. And so what we realize is like, well, look, we've got 125 years of archives, and if we can train the AI on our own archives, right, and
Hmm.
really start, it can learn and it can get better, but we have to feed it good content. And so it's really made us go back and look at our archives and realize, okay, if we can limit the kind of access that the AI is drawing from our own kind of data set, I'll bet it could probably get pretty good. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. Is we need to kind of go back, and then that forces you to decide, okay, well, how do you categorize that artwork?
Hmm.
How do we produce artwork from there? But that way too, you don't have any liability, as far as I can see, of drawing from the internet. You're drawing from your own pool of
Right.
resources. Seems like
Yep.
that kind of helps limit our exposure on that kind of thing. And I also think it'd just be a better tool.
Right. And also, I think there's been a lot of talk about, a lot of the training models are using public domain and maybe not even public domain art. And so artists are pretty up in arms about that's
Absolutely.
our art you're using to train. And so you're basically eating our lunch by doing that. So by creating your own models, you will avoid all that and maybe prevent them from stealing your art to create new models.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's, right now finding the right tool that can best serve that and, have it somewhat economically viable. But the early kind of part of that is bringing along the human factor too, right? Like the designer, to convincing the designer this is a very good tool for them, not going to
Mhm.
replace them.
Yeah, absolutely. David, what role does art play in our society? Are you an artist? I didn't ask you that. Are you an artist? Did you train as an artist? Do you
I did
dabble, or
not.
are you an artist?
I'm not an artist. I studied quite a bit of art, and so I consider myself kind of a frustrated artist. I'm more of a director, right? I sit behind the scenes and I kind of say,
Hmm.
okay, let's do that and then the other. And we have a design team that I work closely with, that we develop designs together because
Hmm.
we're generally designing for a particular commission or client. And a lot of my time is spent gathering that information from the client and then handing it off to the designer. And so, depending on the project, we bring the designer in at different times. So
Hmm.
I feel like I'm creative, but I'm not necessarily an artist. And the beauty of our business is that I can wade into the creative artistic side to where I get out of my range, and then I swing back into the business side, right? And go back into the business side. And I like that. I like that.
Hmm.
Being able to do both. I find running a business in the creative world is challenging, but very rewarding for me. And so I think, in terms of art, I think art does have a very important role. I think art and creativity is one of the best things that the United States has going for it at the moment.
Hmm.
If you think about design, product design, creativity, I think is one of the strongest assets that we have, in California and the United States. I think California is especially strong for that. And it's really what I loved about when I was talking earlier about competing with the German firms, is that what we do, I think, is a very American, very kind of unique West Coast thing, with this
Hmm.
fused glass being formed in Portland. You think about Chihuly and blown glass up in Washington. It's very, kind of a very Pilchuck, which is a glass, teaching school. And then I think the creative energies of California and Southern California,
Mhm.
especially tapping into that. I feel like there's a lot of potential, and specifically for glass, we associate often stained glass, and I feel like my role of educating people is that, glass is not maybe what your preconceived notion of what stained glass is, right? We many of us grew up going to, religious institutions or organization where we, looked at stained glass and we make an association with that, or we think of
Mhm.
Tiffany Studios or something like that. But my feeling is that I think we have the ability to switch that around, and that's why my collaboration with fine artists has really been my push, is to bring creatives into a medium that maybe they didn't have access to before, maybe they wouldn't have thought of working in before. But the power of stained glass and light and color, I think, has the same power that it had in cathedrals, 1,000 years ago, right? To influence us
Yeah.
as humans, maybe just not in a religious way, but still kind of in a public way. That we're so bombarded by a digital world now. We're constantly in a digital realm.
Mhm.
To go and interact with something that could last thousands of years and bring kind of the vibrancy that only natural light can bring, I think, to me, has an impact on your soul, right? It's like
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that things feel very fleeting in the digital realm, or but so to experience something on a creative resonates with us in a different way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well put. Do you have any questions, Eric? Any follow-up questions on that?
No, that's interesting. That's sort of how I got into public art, right? Which is the same idea of fleeting advertising in LA, and then this little part of the copyright world that no one deals with. But I always thought, why not? Like, who wouldn't want to be involved in some way in what people see every day in their lives, right? In natural light, like you're saying, especially if it's good art and kids get to see it. And as they get older, right, it means something else to them. So, um, yeah, that's interesting. So when these artists come to stained glass, like I know you're working with some of the big street artists that I've known about for a while. What's their reactions to it? How do they react, and what kind of things do they want to do or they can't do? Or I guess just tell us some tales, some streets on that. What happens?
Yeah, when I first started kind of reaching out to artists and that kind of thing, street artists were the first ones to react. They totally got it, loved it, were super interested in it. I think they felt like it was a natural transition for them to go from, kind of a mural street art to kind of the oldest public art form in the world, right?
Right.
So those were the first that we started working with, actually, with street artists. And then, now we've kind of been moving into the fine art realm, fine artists showing pieces in gallery spaces. And then also, there's a demand for artists for the public art realm too. I think they're looking to kind of shift their kind of range of work outside of just the gallery world, because that's a difficult world too. If it's a very competitive,
Right.
the relationship with galleries, all of that kind of is very complex and complicated. The beauty about public art is that the scale is very different, the exposure is very different. I think public art is grown to be much more sophisticated than it was, say, 30 years ago, and so I think it's taken a little bit more seriously. And it's a requirement now, right? Like, so there's the 1% free arts that we see in a lot of cities and government organizations that require art to be an aspect of development and architecture. And so, these, really what I think artists need to be able to do is be comfortable working in other mediums, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of painters are not, they just want to paint and that's it. And so they are not interested, or they come in or they get overwhelmed, right? A lot of artists have different sensitivities. They walk into the studio and they're like, yeah, this is too much, I can't deal. Some other artists totally get it, feel totally comfortable working with our team. And there's a time for building that relationship and trust, and confidence with the artist that requires some effort on our part. But once that is established, then it's really sky's the limit. We've had we have a handful of artists that are repeat projects who brought us multiple projects, and they just they totally love working in the medium, and they're able to hand off their artwork and be comfortable with us to be able to fabricate with them. And so although we are fabricators, I think we're more collaborators in that we bring something to the table to the artists that, if we're not adding value, we're not doing our job to them, for them. So, I think it's pretty exciting for them to be able to see. And a lot of their paintings, like when you think about it with natural light and color, are just on a different level and really create a different kind of effect for their work that they may not have ever thought of before.
I have a question
Yeah.
about this. So, unlike a lot of other like prints, you can transmit them digitally. You can sell prints like numbered prints. So, obviously, with stained glass, it's not so simple to have multiple copies because each piece is made. Is there any push to kind of create a way to create multiple pieces at once, maybe to automate the process so people can, it's more affordable basically
Yeah.
because art that's too expensive is really not accessible. So is there any push to kind of automate the process? So, instead of having one original, you could have an original and maybe great copies, like maybe automate, like using inkjet printers or inkjet types of technologies to apply the frit, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we have done it on a limited basis. It depends on the artwork, right? And so the techniques that are involved. So and I guess the advantage and disadvantage, for example, that we did for one artist, we did make an edition for her, and I can't remember how many there were, maybe 100 or maybe fewer than that, but her work did not require any paint. We were able to take her work, digitize it, send it to the water jet, and then just have the water jet cut all the material and fuse it together. And so there are ways of doing it on a limited basis. Other times where we've done an edition, for example, we're changing color, but a lot of times if you're hand painting or there's something that's involved with it, it's just not feasible. But your question about the frit is that we have been speaking with a team to potentially develop an automated way of creating a fritting. So right now, all of our fritting is done by hand. We've had to train our team, but we've been toying around with the idea of creating a machine that actually could distribute frit in an artistic way. And so
make sure you patent it when you're ready.
That might be patentable for sure.
Yeah.
And, that would be something that would require some investment, but could potentially be a game changer. Yeah.
Yeah. Any advice for budding artists who are interested in turning to the fused art realm and expanding their repertoire? Really?
Yeah, I would say go for it. It's trust who you're working with, collaborate. You don't have to know everything, but it creates an immediate ability to expand your resume and allow you to show your work in different areas. I mean, the other beautiful thing about glass is how it's fragile. It's completely resilient. It'll last thousands of years if made properly, right? And so that's something to think about for legacy and longevity and performance in environments where a painting, for example, would not be able to be used. So that's something to think about, I think. And we're happy to host artists here in our studio.
Fantastic. Lastly, important question: whatever happened to Judson's Bar down at Torrey Pines?
Yeah,
is that up and running?
Is up and running. Yeah, it has Judson glass in it now, and I have not visited it. I'm hoping to visit Torrey Pines Lodge next month and have a drink in the Judson's Bar. Yep.
You gonna take your trademark lawyers?
Yeah, you guys should come on and
I'll be down in LA in June, so maybe I'll have to hit Torrey Pines Bar.
yeah, we could sit by the pool. It's a pool bar, so we can sit by the pool and have some drinks and
That sounds perfect. That sounds like heaven.
Well, we have
Um,
to inspect the quality of the goods. We have to make sure that the good name of Judson is
that's right.
associated with high quality experiences.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, David and Eric. So thank you
Yeah,
so much for
thanks.
being on this show. And again, if anyone's interested in finding more about the artwork and processes, you can go to www.judsonstudios.com, and there's wonderful stuff. David wrote a book a few years ago, and I bought it, a signed copy.
Wow.
You can see it, and it's a great
There
book.
you go.
It's got all the history
Oh, cool.
and all kinds of new stuff, including three-dimensional works that you're doing, which I think they're so cool. So it seems like there's just new things. And you recently acquired another company called Griffith Griffin Glass. Hard to say fast three times. And it does architectural, like three-dimensional glass, and that has, I guess that's your third facility in Monrovia. So how's that going? Is it going well, I guess?
Yeah, that's been a little bit of a little more challenging, and that's where we're really kind of leaning into the AI also in
Uh-huh.
that regard. It's a little bit of a different market, but yeah, we have good high hopes for it.
Well, fantastic. All right. Well, thanks, David. And to everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this program. And again, you can see us at canipatentit.com, and have a great day and keep on inventing.